When my partner said he wanted to buy an extra blanket, I said, I have scraps, I like a challenge, let me sew you a quilt. And then I designed a quilt inspired by a starry night sky, with a sweet little message hidden amongst the stars. And then I worked out a plan, and it's an ambitious plan. There's 5 different stars, it's big, and I want to make it using scraps and fabric from my stash. Then I started wondering, can I actually pull this off? But one thing my first quilt taught me is I shouldn't ask those questions and just get started. So I rummaged through my scraps and stash, looking for blue, ochre and off-white. Colors that could fit the theme of this quilt, a star-filled sky. I just went through all of my scraps and this is what I have to work with. I found a nice selection, but I didn't have enough blue, so I added a fabric that has a slight purple tone to it, but it seems to work with the color scheme. Now I need to sort the fabrics that I have into color groups so that I have them ready for when I'm cutting the blocks. I even have a couple of black fabrics in there, which I think are going to look really nice in the background. I could use any dark scrap I could find, because I do know how much fabric I actually need since I planned it using pre-quilt, and it gives you an estimate for yardage. But since I'm using scraps, it's hard to know precisely how much yardage I have. Yeah, it's a big project with lots of uncertainty. So for my first block, I decided to go with something I know, and that's the sawtooth block. I use it in my first quilt and I hope it will ease me into the project. Okay, I just started unpicking one of these samples that I did for a YouTube tutorial, and then I realized for the sawtooth star I need this fabric. If I want to get started and at least finish one block, then I need to start with the right fabric. I have one sleeve and these smaller scraps. I think I have enough to do at least one sawtooth star, and that's all I'm going to do for now. And then I also need some dark background fabric. I think this old pair of pants is going to be a nice match with the bright color. And then there was a lot of pressing and trimming until I had all the pieces to make the sawtooth star. First up are the flying geese, and these are going to make up the points of the star. And this is only my second quilt, but I've done these before about 100 times for my first quilt, but I noticed I was a little bit rusty. Oh, it's not really straight, and I didn't sew all the way to the end. I think I'll just keep going with this one. And whether or not that was a smart decision, well, stay tuned. What I definitely think is a good decision is leaving the wear marks on the blue fabric on the right side of the quilt block so that you can see them in the final result. I like that the marks are little hints of the former life as a pair of pants, and I really love when I can keep them in the quilt. Leaving the marks in like this adds character in a way that you just can't get when you're working with new fabric. Now, I wouldn't use it if it was completely worn out, but in this case the fabric was still strong enough. I can feel the fabric shift while I'm sewing and working with it, which could be a problem. There is enough to work with, but as you can see, it's quite wonky. This should be 5, so this should be 2.5. It took me a minute to work out how to cut flying geese, but eventually I figured it out. 2 hours later. I did cut all the flying geese, but I'm not sure how good of a job I did. But at least I have them, and now I can move on and sew the block together. Okay, I made a mistake, so it's too big. But when I measured, it's not big enough. I don't want to mess with it tonight. When it comes to sewing, I find that it's never a good idea to make big decisions when you're tired. So a night's sleep or some dinner, and then I'll let you know what I did. I'm back, and I wanted to say refreshed, but that's not how I feel. Still, I am going to quilt today, and I decided that this block is going to be a future me problem, in a sense that I have a solution, I just don't have the block to fix it yet. Because what I'm going to do is combine this one with a block where it's more logical to add an extra bit of fabric. And the only thing I need to do is put like a post-it on it so that I remember it later on. Problem number 1 sort of solved. And then problem number 2 is I found the fabric difficult to work with because it's scraps, pieces that have been washed as garments, and I don't want to deal with that right now. I think I might have to resort to using starch, but not today. So I'm going to use the scraps that have been unwashed and see if I can make a 16 patch. Now the instructions say that I should cut squares that are 2.75 inches, but that's inefficient as long as I have larger scraps. So I am going to use the larger scraps to work with strips. If you remember my design from the beginning of the video, you might have noticed that I chose a checkerboard style for the 16 patch. But I'm not necessarily going for a high contrast quilt and high contrast block. I would love the background of the quilt to have this random pattern, but very subtle. So the colors I chose for the 16 patch are actually quite close together, but I'm hoping different enough so that they are going to look interesting. Now, to create the blocks using the strips, what I did is I cut up each fabric into strips, sew those strips together to get even longer strips, and then alternate the different colors in, sew those together to get a larger piece of fabric. And you'll see later how I use them to create the block. And for the strips, I press the seams open, but once they're all sewn together, I'm pressing the seams to one side. And the strips I cut in the beginning were 2.75 inches, and the strips I'm cutting now are also going to be 2.75. And it's really easy. You just turn 2 of the 4 strips upside down, and then you have the checkerboard effect. You just have to sew them together. Oops. I mean, it was an easy fix, but still, it's a good reminder that organization is important. Yay! Okay, that looks a lot better. And I know there's little spots here, but those are just like little mistakes in the weave. And I like that they add texture, so we're keeping them in. All right, this should be 9.5. And I have 1/4 inch extra, which I don't mind, because the edges, they are not perfectly straight. So having some margin for trimming is good. Cool, we have a start. First one is done. Now I am going to do some bulk cutting and then sewing, and probably spend my evening behind the sewing machine. I don't think I like the blocks with the purple in it. Maybe I should simply trust the process, but I'm really second guessing myself. And it's not like I have unlimited scraps in these colors, so I need to make decisions about whether or not to use the purple. But I think for now I'm going to focus on unpicking some of the garments and doing some prep work instead of sewing more of these blocks, and then check again tomorrow. Okay, maybe I overreacted. When I look at the color tones today, I mean, it's a sort of messy pile of fabric at the moment, but I think once I turn all of the fabric into quilt blocks, it's going to come together. I have to come to terms with the fact that it's a scrappy quilt and it's not perfectly coordinated, and that's an asset, not a problem. So more blocks and a bit of confidence in the process. I was just tidying and I had a thought. Maybe I need to take the blocks I made that stood out to me a bit too much and make them scrappier. And that way they're going to blend in more with the other fabrics. So instead of continuing with the big piece that I made yesterday, I'm going to use the leftover bits from the strips and combine them with scraps. So basically, more scrappy, more better. It was a good reminder that I shouldn't treat my plan as a paint by numbers project, but that I should see it as a work in progress and let my scraps inspire me along the way. That should be enough to do a first test. And I started to work on lots of different pieces of fabric. I would take just one small strip from each sample, and the idea behind it is that I need to take all the scraps that I have and spread them out amongst as many blocks as I can. So for example, if I need to make 100 blocks in total and 50 of them are 16 patches, then I would need to reserve about half of each piece of fabric for the 16 patches. And if I have a block where I'm making maybe 25 out of 100, then I would have to reserve about 25% of the scraps for that specific block. I think that will be the best way to ensure that I get a randomized background pattern and that there aren't going to be like hotspots or blocks that stand out too much once I finished everything. There's some awkward spots, but all in all, I do think this could work. After a not so smooth start of this quilt, I actually think it's going to do more than just work. I think it's going to look lovely, but I'm not even halfway through this quilt and I already noticed how uncomfortable it was being hunched over my table while cutting fabric. So I'm really excited that FlexiSpot gifted me the E7 Pro standing desk and made my life a lot more comfortable. In the past, I've considered getting a separate cutting table, but I don't really have the space for that. And this desk does it all, saving not only my back, but space. I never thought about sewing while standing up, but the desk is so heavy duty that even though you're standing up and sewing, it doesn't wobble. For longer sewing sessions, I would definitely prefer to sit down, but it works well if you have to do like a quick seam in between cutting. It can lift up to 160 kilos, so even if you would add a sewing machine or cover stitch and a locker, then you wouldn't even be close to the limit. It could even lift a person, but I would never try that out, so there's that. The desk has lots of cool options like a USB port, a tray for cable management, a memory function, and the desk has a 10-year warranty. Plus, you can return it for free within 60 days. FlexiSpot offers all kinds of standing desks, ergonomic chairs, sofas, so I've put a link in the description and feel free to check out their website and shop around. Okay, back to quilting, because it's been a couple of days. I had to rearrange my sewing studio / kitchen a little bit, but I'm ready to tackle one of the more important blocks in the quilt, because I've already hinted at adding a secret message in the beginning, and let me explain what I mean. I love it when there is a story attached to a project, and in this case I embedded a sweet memory into the design. I took the date of when my partner and I first met and used it to generate a star map. And from that map, I picked one of the constellations that would have been above our heads on that first date. So the yellow stars are the Hercules constellation, and even though you might not recognize it when you look up at the night sky, for me and hopefully my partner, it will be a reminder of a sweet memory. For the points of the star, I'm going to make 4 half-square triangles at a time, and sew together two 2.75-inch squares to each other. Then cut it in half, and then cut those halves in half again. And because the squares were a little bit too big on purpose, I need to cut the half square triangles and then trim them down to 1.5 inch. Okay, change of plans. I'm going to put this on top of the cutting mat so that I can turn this, because it's so small and finicky, and I think this is going to work best. When I was looking back this footage, I was like, why do I need the mat to twist? And I think it will be more useful for that first step. So when I attach the 2 squares together, because then it makes sense to not touch the fabric, switch the mat around and reposition the ruler. But for the small half square triangle trimming, it doesn't really matter. And once I had the 4 half square triangles for the star ready, I could fill out the block. I used 4 dark blues on the corner and a yellow for the center, all 1.5 inch. At first, I didn't want to tackle this block yet, because I was afraid it might be too difficult, because this star unit is so small. But then I thought I might as well try it, because even if I run into issues, I can always adjust my plan. I need to remember that the plan or design that I made is there to guide me, like the stars I'm sewing, but the scraps will help me decide what the next step is. It's so cute. I finished the little friendship star, and this will go inside the 9-inch block, so I still need to add strips around it, but I can do that later. For now I'm just going to do the stars, the block inside the block, and then once I have those, I have a better idea of how much fabric I have left, and I can easily fill it out around the edges, and I don't have to worry as much about the size, because I can just trim it down if it's a little bit too big, or add some extra when it's too small. Okay, I did notice that I switched this little square around, so the back of the fabric is towards the front and the front of the fabric is towards the back of the block. But I think it's going to add to the scrappy look, especially when I use that fabric more and it will be switched around even more. I think it will add to the charm. I have a lot of cutting and sewing to do, but I'm going to leave this video here for now and check back in once I get started on the other blocks.